Somewhere inside Mercury Marine, there is a list of numbers that nobody outside the company has ever seen. And one of them just leaked out onto a convention stage, wearing a horsepower rating so absurd that rival engineers reportedly went straight back to their own labs to check their timelines. 808 horsepower, from one single outboard engine. Flip open the spec sheet and the record reads plainly enough. An 808 horsepower concept, shown once, in public, in January of 2026. But Mercury's own marketing language calls it something closer to a redrawn ceiling, while the trade press that saw it up close described the reaction in the room as somewhere between disbelief and dread. Not stacked, not paired, not tripled on a transom, one motor, one number, and an entire industry suddenly recalculating what too much power even means. The instinct was to assume it was a typo, or some overhyped rumor cooked up on a forum at 2 a.m. It wasn't. But here's what almost every headline chasing this story got completely backwards. The horsepower number is not the real announcement. It's the smokescreen. Underneath it sit two other numbers Mercury has barely said out loud, and once you hear them, the 808 stops looking like the biggest story of the year and starts looking like a distraction on purpose. One of those numbers costs $250 and fits on a USB stick. We'll land on both by the end of this video. Let's rewind and set the scene, because the location of this reveal is practically a confession on its own. According to marine industry outlet Water Wire, Brunswick Corporation CEO, David Fawkes, personally unveiled this concept engine at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Look it up plainly and the entry just says, CES, January 2026, Las Vegas. Say it out loud on Mercury's own channels, though, and it becomes a story about a boat company stepping onto the biggest technology stage in the world. Say it in the boating press, and it becomes something closer to a warning shot nobody in the marine industry was prepared for. CES is where the world sees next-generation phones, humanoid robots, and self-driving prototypes. It is not, under any normal circumstance, where you expect a marine engine to make its debut. Roughly a month later, the identical concept resurfaced at the Miami International Boat Show, this time in front of thousands of everyday boaters who got to walk up and study it themselves. Powerboat News, which photographed the engine on display in Miami that February, described its reappearance as the next visible step in Mercury's campaign to dominate the high-performance end of the market. Two audiences that almost never overlap, Silicon Valley and the docks, shown the exact same machine, weeks apart. That is a company testing a message on two different rooms before deciding how loud to make it. So what do we actually know? Surprisingly little. Multiple outlets, including barquiamotor.com alongside Water Wire, note Mercury has been careful to label this strictly a concept, no price, no release window, no production commitment. But Water Wire's own reporting states the 808 horsepower unit shares its foundation with Mercury's current flagship, the 600 horsepower V12 Viridou, same 7.6-liter block, same core architecture. Powerboat News suggests the number itself hints at a supercharged version of that platform, following a playbook Mercury Racing has used before. Take a proven engine, bolt on forced induction, unlock a dramatically higher ceiling. The 600 horsepower V12 itself has three different versions of its own origin story depending on where you look. Scan a plain specs timeline and the entry is almost boring. First shown, February 2021. Read Mercury's own press materials from that month and the launch gets dressed up as the most significant outboard introduction in the company's history. Read the trade coverage written at the time, and it reads more like disbelief in real time, outlets comparing the reveal to a car company casually rolling out a supercar nobody had asked for, and then watching people line up to buy it anyway. The engine was later named a CES Innovation Award honoree, per an announcement distributed through Globe News Wire, for engineering including the first automatic transmission ever integrated into an outboard. Plenty of veterans assumed Mercury had overreached at 600 horsepower. The market answered that skepticism by buying every one Mercury could build, with builders mounting 2, 3, 4 of them onto oversized center consoles. Play that forward and boats currently running 3 engines could reconfigure around 2. Boats running 4 could scale back to 3. 50 and 60-foot center consoles that have belonged to diesel inboards for generations suddenly have a genuine outboard option. On the Whole Truth Boating forum, one thread pushed back hard on all of this. Some posters doubted Mercury would ever bring an 808 horsepower engine to production, and one commenter wondered whether any existing lower unit could survive that torque without a full redesign. That, believe it when it ships, instinct is fair, and we'll come back to it. Now here's the first payoff. 1 month after Miami, Mercury didn't unveil one product. It unveiled 4 at once, and the quietest of the 4 is the one that matters most. Alongside a keyless ignition system and an upgraded joystick suite, Mercury released something called Boost, a $250 dealer reflash that rewrites an existing engine's ignition timing and fuel mapping. No new hardware. The plain record of it just says, dealer rollout began March 23, 2026. Mercury's own materials describe it as unlocking performance that was engineered in from day one. Owner forums, less generously, described it as Mercury finally charging for something a $40 aftermarket tuner used to do for free, minus the voided warranty. Mercury's own published figures claim a 5 to 21% gain in mid-range acceleration on engines already sitting on customers' boats. It covers a wide band of existing 4-strokes and Verados, and, notably, engines built before 2022 were locked out of eligibility until a window that only opened this July. That detail is what makes the story current. There's a population of older Mercury owners who just became eligible for a factory power unlock and likely don't know it. The obvious comparison is Tesla, selling cars where hardware ships dormant until a software payment switches it on. Boaters have effectively done a shadier version of this for years through chipping, third-party tuners reflashing engine computers, which instantly voids the factory warranty. Mercury built an official, warranted version of exactly that gray market trick. Reaction has been mixed rather than uniformly glowing. Some owners on base boat forums reported doing side-by-side demo rides and not feeling a difference. Others said a software file should simply be free. One buyer described calling 7 authorized dealers trying to get flashed, and several hadn't even heard of Boost yet. The rollout is real, but still catching up to the announcement. Which brings us to the second payoff, the number sitting quietly underneath all of it. Based on public statements from Mercury and Brunswick, there are currently 5 separate outboard engine platforms in active development simultaneously. Say that number flatly and it's just a line item from an earnings call. Say it the way Brunswick CEO said it to analysts, and it becomes proof the company's market share gains are, in his word, structural, not a lucky streak. Say it the way industry watchers are starting to say it, and it becomes a 5-front war the rest of the industry hasn't clocked yet. Not 5 minor refreshes, but genuinely distinct platforms spanning the mid-range engines ordinary boaters buy up through further extensions of this new ultra-high horsepower category. Developing one new platform typically demands years of investment. Running 5 at once is a company positioning to strike every price point at the same moment. There's a 4th number worth sitting with here too, and it might be the most concrete one of all. At the 2026 Miami International Boat Show, in the on-water section where the serious money floats, Mercury engines were hanging on 84% of the boats. Written down as a bare statistic, that's just a market research line in a trade report. Spoken on Brunswick's own earnings call, it becomes the word structural, the CEO's way of telling analysts this isn't a lucky streak that evaporates the moment a competitor catches up. Spoken by the boaters actually walking those docks, it becomes something closer to a joke that stopped being funny. Walk past 10 large boats and count, and more than 8 of them are wearing the same logo. 6 weeks later, at the West Palm Beach show, the number was 70%, up again year over year. Whichever voice you hear it in, the takeaway is the same. Yamaha, Suzuki, Honda, and everyone else are now fighting over what's left of a shrinking slice, not competing for the whole pie. Put the 808, Boost, the 5-platform pipeline, and that 84% next to each other and the venue choice stops looking strange. The messaging around this launch, echoed across marine trade coverage, centers on what Mercury internally calls a prop-to-helm philosophy, owning not just the motor, but the software running it, the connected systems feeding data to an app, the console displays, the joystick controls. The keyless system and joystick aren't about convenience for its own sake. They're about making the boat a connected Mercury device from the moment you touch it. Boost isn't really about $250. It's proof a Mercury engine is a software platform that can improve over time in a way a purely mechanical competitor engine cannot. Putting an Outboard on a CES stage, surrounded by consumer electronics, was a deliberate signal to investors, tech journalists, and competitors that Mercury increasingly views itself as a platform company that happens to build the most powerful outboards on the market. Before this sounds like an unpaid advertisement, here's the honest pushback. The existing V12 platform already carries a reputation among owners for added complexity, more electronics, more integrated systems, more theoretical points of failure than a simpler mechanical outboard. One Hull Truth commenter joked the concept engine looked like a convenient distraction from ongoing reliability complaints tied to the current 600 horsepower engine. Scaling that architecture past 800 horsepower means pushing cooling systems, gear cases, and electronics further than they've been asked to perform on a recreational engine before. And Boost raises its own separate question. If 21% more performance can be switched on with a software flash, that capability shipped on the boat all along, just waiting for a payment. Today that's a cheap one-time unlock with warranty intact, but the car industry has already shown where paywalled hardware can drift toward subscriptions and recurring fees. There's also a broader concern about horsepower ceilings climbing faster than operator training does, and it's worth remembering competitors aren't standing still. This exact market has flipped before. It's also worth being honest about the 84% number from a few minutes ago, because a stat that clean invites its own skepticism. Boat shows are not neutral ground. Builders choose which engines to rig well before the doors open, often locked into supply deals struck a year or two in advance, so a chunk of that share reflects decisions made long before this year's headlines rather than a sudden stampede toward Mercury this season. A dominant on-water percentage at one show in 1 month is a snapshot, not a guarantee it holds the same shape at the next one. So here's where this lands. The 808 horsepower concept is real and will keep generating headlines, but the numbers that should actually worry Mercury's competitors were never 808. They're 250 and 5, a $250 file that turns 2 decades of existing engines into upgradable platforms, and 5 separate engine platforms moving simultaneously to hit every segment of the market at once. The concept engine is the fireworks display designed to get everyone looking up. The real invasion is quieter, moving underneath it. If you already own a Mercury outboard, or you're shopping for one, understand you're not just picking an engine brand off a spec sheet anymore. You're choosing a company betting its future on staying several moves ahead on multiple fronts at once, while one flashy concept absorbs the headlines. If you own a compatible engine built before 2022, window is worth an actual phone call to your dealer, even if you end up being the one explaining what Boost is. And if you're shopping new, the honest framing is that you're no longer just comparing horsepower numbers on a spec sheet. You're picking which company's app, which company's software cadence, and which company's future price increases you're willing to live with for the next decade of ownership. Let me know where you land in the comments. Does the 808 ever reach production, or does it stay a concept forever, existing purely to keep the rest of the industry nervous? And if Mercury really does have 5 platforms moving simultaneously behind the scenes, which segment do you think gets the surprise reveal next? The entry-level engines most people actually buy, or something that dwarfs even what we just walked through together? Subscribe if you want to be here when real details on any of those 5 platforms start to leak, because this channel will have it first. Until then, keep your bilge dry and your throttle hand steady. See you on the water.